Hey guys, this is Mikro. I am back with the video after a decently long break for some semi-competitive Overwatch stuff and for finals, which are still ongoing, so some of these videos would be sparse, but I'm coming back with a alt tier list as well as class tier list and where I think classes stand when the PTR patch hits live, which will be hitting live very shortly. I believe it comes live tomorrow on Tuesday, the 6th of December. So, and the big thing about this patch is the introduction to the Bile Bomb on Ultimate, which if you have not seen it, is basically a giant AoE disease that lingers and travels when it gets onto people. So it's just basically going to spread disease throughout the battlefield, and as well as a significant buff to the damage from the cannon ultimate, which basically means that all ranged classes will now have a useful ultimate. And ranged classes tend to farm ults the fastest, which means that a lot of the stuff from this next patch will be everyone's just going to be at disease cap like almost passively. So a lot of the OP builds for next patch I assume will be ones that are rend oriented, because everyone's already at disease cap, so there's no reason, or there's less of a reason to run builds like BBVG now, and generally it's going to be more about survivability and more about inflicting rend on people, and since people don't have cleanse pots, people will die very, very quickly next patch, I assume, or more quickly than before due to the Bile Bomb ultimate. But there's also the counter, if there's a different Bile Bomb variant that lets your team basically have a mass essence rupture on people that lasts for a long time, so I think AoE healers are going to have a significant output increase as well. Like, you already see AoE healers getting top leaderboards right now with multiple mil worth of healing per war, and I imagine that will increase even more now. And if people aren't pressuring out AoE healers, they're going to get significantly punished because of how OP these ults are. And I imagine even classes that normally you'd have a healer like run uh, stone form or something along those lines to get away. I imagine if you are a healer that's able to live without the stone form and slot like with this ultimate and maybe do something unconventional, but like running like a chain life staff or something that like gets your ultimate faster, then you're going to be doing significantly more output than people and be a far more valuable healer, even if you're dead more often. Just because of how powerful the leeching effect is when it's spread to everyone. It's like every time you use an AoE, that's just gonna heal everyone for 20%. Like, that's a very, very large amount. So I imagine these ults will shape up the meta a lot, and it'll make a lot of classes that weren't as good, like, very, very viable. Like, even Fire Staff, which before I think this last patch was definitely an F tier, maybe like the worst weapon in New World, besides like maybe Voidblade, but even Voidblade might be better than Fire Staff in current patch, but not much by much. Like, I think that weapon will be significantly better as well, just because of these ultimates, but I don't imagine it will be as good as some of the alternatives, just because of how weak Fire Staff is in general, since it doesn't have utility, it just has pure damage. But if everyone's constantly at disease cap and rend cap, then maybe Fire Staff will actually be able to land kills for once, which will be interesting, but we will see. But this is where I have the tier list for now. You'll notice, like, well, I did put the ults in here for once because I haven't been doing that. I figured that was important relatively. If you're new to wars, you might not realize that like some ults are better on attack and some are better on defense. Like, Dropouts is the only company on the US to win an attack war versus what people would consider to be a tier 1 company, or maybe upper tier 2 with Boogaflu. I don't consider Supple's win to be a win because it was at 0.0 seconds, so it's like, it's just lucky at that point. It's not like convincing like the Dropouts wins were like with 11 minutes left and like with maybe 8 or 7 minutes left. And the big difference there is the strat used on attack, and also ultimates, because Stone Form is very, very strong on attack, and people don't realize that, because it actually lets you survive when everyone else commits all their ultimates to engages, which is how people are using it right now. So that's why these are down here. And then you'll also notice that Kill Squad has a lot of builds in it. I think Kill Squad is probably the most diverse role in the game of like what you can run as long as you're good at it. And you frag out basically. It's just a battle of who could frag out the best. It doesn't really matter what weapon you're using as long as you frag out very hard. And that's all you're like really looking there. You're looking at pressure and you're looking at who's killing the most people. And then Tanks has a lot of builds as well because there's a lot of variations and a lot of like I'd say off-meta specs that are good as a tank player. But the thing is people generally don't run those and they'll just stick to the conventional IGBB. But IGBB's util right now is like a 12 to like 15% disease. Like it sometimes gets up to the 20s, but it's like very, very low. I don't think IGBB has like any util, and it's just a pure support like survivability tank. And it as a survivability tank, I consider it to be the second best one in the game, behind Greatsword Warhammer, from experience playing all of these. So, yeah. And then you'll notice I have some S plus tiers and some S tiers in here. The S plus ones are the builds I imagine will be the best next patch, no matter what, and then all these other builds are just relative. Supports, I don't have any in the S tier, because I don't think support builds are actually very good next patch. The reason why I don't think they're as good is because people are gonna be, they have this ult that's gonna apply disease, right? So your support build inherently is just gonna be getting like less value. It's not as good as it used to be. Like it's still survivable and it still like plays a role and it's still important, but it's not gonna have like a larger impact. Like I could see some people like wanting to run like a triple bruiser one support, like as a main squad build, just because of how much better bruiser builds are at the moment than support builds and how much more output they have. And that healing problem could be compensated if you run the ult that gives lots of lifesteal. So there's like ways around this. The other big change that is happening next patch, which impacts this tier list as a whole, is all these runeglass ultimates that have a dot. That dot is going to contribute to ult charge, and it has no cooldown. So basically everyone's going to be getting their ults like significantly faster. I imagine it will be like along the lines of like 20 to 40% faster than it is on live. And that applies off like any ability. It could apply to AoEs. There's no cooldown on this, which in my opinion, if for balancing purposes, there probably should be a cooldown on this, but because there's not, ults will just be supercharged next patch. And when the ultimates are very, very good and they're supercharged, then that basically just means that a lot of these things that were good will not be as good. That being said, in New World in particular, metas don't tend to shift very often because it's hard to acquire new gear sets. So even if you're playing something that was like good last meta and it's not as good this meta, doesn't mean it's bad. Like the most important thing is like playing with your group and playing well off your group, because there's not like builds that will just one-shot people, so it's not like a super mechanical meta, especially with like the detonate nerf that's coming through, where detonate's going to be doing 10% less damage, and at that point detonate's like a kind of a sus thing to run, because you're dealing 20% extra damage but you're applying a 15% run to yourself. It's like a little scary because you're basically going full glass cannon. Like you will either just get one shot, which you probably should be shooting people who are detonating right now, but definitely next patch, because it will do less damage to you, or you can. So it's like, yeah, I don't think that will be as good, but it will still be very good. Like on defense, detonate is always strong because you can get the ultimate off the dummies, which for some reason has not been nerfed on the PTR. So defenders like basically go into a fight given they always have ultimate. So defenders have a big advantage there, which is why there have been like almost no companies that have won an attack since the ult patch. I think Dropouts is the only one on East Coast that has like won against tier 1 or upper tier 2 companies, depending on where you rate Bugflu. So it's, yeah, ults have been very, very impactful to say the least. But hopping into this right away, Kill Squad, I think Bow is the best Kill Squad build in the game next patch. Great Sword stuff is close behind, but Bow is a little bit superior, because Bow with the is able to charge ultimates very, very fast, and the ultimate buffs that they got to both cannon, which I believe just does extra damage now. I forget how much more, but I've heard it's significant enough to be very, very good. And then there's also the Bile Bomb ultimates, which are also very good. So Bows be able to charge the ultimates the fastest in the game out of any weapon, and the ultimates are good now, which I think makes bow very, very good, as well as bow just has good, like, potential to kill people if set up correctly in the right group. Like a solo bow that's not landing kills could be bad, but if your bow player is able to get kills and charge these ultimates, which will swing fights, then bow becomes a very, very good weapon. As a neutral weapon, as a, like, just looking for kills, Great Sword SNS is probably the best weapon in the game for that, and then Great Sword Great Axe is closely behind. Both those builds are very, very strong. They just don't have this, like, ult pressure, where I don't think they'll have the LP ultimate, which is why I rate them a little bit lower than, like, the bow. And I did put the bow with Great Sword on top and a little bit behind that's Musket, but I think you could argue Musket could be in the S+ tier. I think it's, like, very, very close. I just think Great Sword's a little bit better for bow, because if you're mainly going to be using the bow if you're playing it like this, and if you're playing bow musket, you're going to be at a longer distance where these ultimates will have less of an impact. So I think because you're closer with this build, and the greatsword allows you to play closer and have good survivability, you just have to time your abilities and dodges well. Then if you're, like, really good at that class, you will just be able to swing wars. Other, like, notable builds on here, there's some of the older builds. Like, I don't think Rapier's nearly as good. I don't think Musket's still, like, good, but it's not, like, as good. They did nerf it once, and then they accidentally buffed it, and then they nerfed it again, so it's a little bit worse than it used to be. I don't think it's, like, super significant, but the biggest thing with Musket is if you're not playing it, like, fairly close up, you're not going to be able to get value out of the ultimates, which I think are the best part about, like, bow, and why I think bow will be better next patch than musket, because the ultimates that have come out, and as you've seen from wars this patch, if you've been watching wars where basically no one wins attacks versus good companies, then the ults are the most impactful thing in this game. And it's not like your neutral weapon, but it's about how fast you can charge your ult and what your ult does, mostly is what will win wars. The weapon itself is also important, but it's not important as the ultimates, in my opinion. BBIG is still very good. IG finally got fixed with Entomb. They've reverted it so that you don't have to iframe into Entomb or block into Entomb or cry as someone hits you when you're going into Entomb and it cancels, so you just die. So that Ice Gauntlet's actually usable again, which is nice. Keep in mind it's still heavily nerfed from where it used to be, and it is not a great weapon, but it is better. And when you compare, like, something like Ice Gauntlet to, like, Greatsword, like, oh my god, Greatsword does so much more than Ice Gauntlet, but Ice Gauntlet is in a better spot than it used to be, at least. This is a funny build with this should be Greatsword. Greatsword and Ice Gauntlet that I had someone comment about, and then I thought it was, at first thought it was, like, kind of a meme, like, not very good, but it turns out it's, like, very strong. So the crux of why this is good is on the current patch with buff detonate, there was a build where you had a 100% crit rate that did a 10k AoE while you were in heavy attack, or while you were in heavy. So if you're in light, that's going to be doing about 12k guaranteed, and it bases off the fact that Greatsword gives a passive, if you set it up correctly, I believe 35% in power. And then there's other ways to get that higher, as well as a perk that makes it so that your next attack is a guaranteed crit. And then you can combo that with detonate, and the way that the viewer that commented on the channel was, like, running it, was he's running it with a 200 int, so if, as long as you're above that 150 int threshold, then you're going to be doing an extra 15% damage with that. So it basically just turns the ultimate into a nuke. And because you could supercharge the ultimates with Ice Gauntlet, it's a very quirky build, but it's, like, a borderline, like, kill squad support build that actually is quite strong, but not really seeing any play. So I rated that, like, an A tier. I think it could be upper B, but I think it's better than Fire Staff stuff, and it's actually, like, not a bad build considering you get ultimates, like, every 30 to 45 seconds if you're running Ice Gauntlet on current patch, and then next patch it will be even faster than that. And if you have an ultimate that does, like, say, like, it's going to be nerfed, right? But say you're running that in light and it does 10k right now in heavy, and you're running that in light, then you're going to be doing, like, 11 to 12k as an AoE around you. Like, that's going to nuke any clump in the game, which makes this still a very, very strong role to have, even if the main util is just the ultimate itself. If you have an ultimate that is getting 4 to 5 kills every 30 seconds, that is still a very good build. Fire Staff is back off of F tier just because it will be able to charge ultimates fairly fast, because dots charge ultimates fast and Fire Staff has a lot of burns. It's not for the actual Fire Staff utility itself, I just think it's an okay build at charging ultimates as well as Ice Gauntlet getting fixed / buffed, so that will help it a bit too. BBVG, it's okay, not as good anymore, because everyone will be at disease cap basically. I think BBIG is just a better build for Kill Squad in general, because you're not going to be getting as much value with the VG stuff, unless you're specifically able to get close to people, in which case it's okay. Then there's some other builds down here that I don't think are as run, and I threw on an honorary Void Blade and for my like 3 Void Blade users. It's not good if you're running it, but if you are running it, it is probably the worst weapon in the game next patch, so just know that if you were to run a Greatsword with Plague Strikes, you would be doing more than if you had Void Blade, and if you ran any other weapon in the game, you'd basically be doing more than if you had Void Blade on right now. It's a bit of a sad world for that weapon. And I consider it to be a Kill Squad weapon, not a support weapon, because if you run this, then you have to drop some like heavy util based ability, which inherently will make it more of a Kill Squad oriented weapon. Like I think the most common build with that is you drop the Oblivion and you run Orb and Scream, which feels okay as a Kill Squad if you play it right, but it's not as strong as any of these other weapons. Bruisers, not much has changed. I put that Detonate build in here just for fun. I think Great Axe Ice Gauntlet's okay next patch because Ice Gauntlet is back, but realistically you're running Great Sword Warhammer and Great Axe Warhammer, and that's about it. Great Sword Warhammer I don't think is as popular right now. I think it's very strong because it could block. You can block stuns right now, so it inherently just messes with Great Axe Warhammer groups, and because a lot of people just spam light attacks, I think it also takes advantage of that since it could block things. I think if you are gonna run this build, don't like always be in the left like onslaught passive. Like I think the right tree's passive is just significantly better than the left tree's passive, because the left tree passive puts that 15% rend on you and turn for extra damage, which is like nice, but if you're trading blows and you have 15% rend on you, it's like not generally going to be favored. But if no one's hitting you and you're on passive, it's very good. So it's like a bit of a balancing act there, but I think it's still a good build, and I think it would be a very, very good build if it was run as a third of next patch. Like if you had 2 Great Axe Warhammers and then you had one of these, I think it would be very strong, especially because this build has the ability to pull people into one clump and root them consistently, and then you swap to your Warhammer and stun them, which I've talked about in a couple other guides in the past, but I think that ability in a normal group makes it potentially better than running like one of these support builds. Like in my opinion, I think ideally next patch you would run 3 people in the Bruiser role and then you'd run 1 support due to this ult being so prevalent. If the ult's not as prevalent, then you would probably want to still run the 2 supports. But I think Bruisers are a significantly more impactful role, so I don't understand why you would run as many supports. Going to supports, talked about this a second ago, but I don't think any of these are like very good next patch. They're all okay. But I don't think any of them are particularly good. Before I rated Pylon very, very high because it charged ults. I think Pylon is still very, very strong, but I think it's stronger as a tank build than as a support build at the moment, and even like a tier lower as a support build, just because the Pylon will consistently get broken as a support, and as a tank it stays up a little bit longer, / has more like util from on the point because of the Pylon burst actually hitting multiple people. So as a tank, you get the ultimates a lot faster than you do as an off support, but it's still very annoying if the pylons don't get broken. Like if you have pylons that are guarding your healers, it can be very strong and annoying for a kill squad, but I don't think it's as good as the normal like IGVG build next patch. There is like I think you could argue that it could be like in the same tier, and it's like a little bit of a preference game, but if you have like everyone running Pylon, it's probably a mistake. If you have everyone running this build, it's probably a mistake. You want to mix of both, because if you have everyone running the normal build with Storm, then the Storm's just going to override the Storm, and you're not going to get as much ultimate charge as you would if you were running Pylon. And Storm doesn't really have any util at the moment because everyone's already on slow cap from various things. Like Warhammer abilities coming out, from Greatsword abilities coming out, from like just melees hitting each other. Like people aren't going to be moving anyway, so I don't think I'd argue slow has no util, like Storm has no util, and the only, because ultimate chill doesn't work anymore, the only util of Storm is charging your ultimate fast, so whichever build charges your ultimate faster, I think is the better build for next patch. I don't think BBIG is a good support build at all next patch. I don't think, because BB's like util is like very minimal. I think it's okay if it's like, if you're gonna run this, I would probably run it as like a anti-kill squad setup. But usually people slot that like in the kill squad themselves, and I think it's a bit better there than it is as like a normal support build. It's not bad, but I don't think it's like insane. Like the main util of it at this point is the burst damage from the actual grenades itself, which is very good if you stack fire damage, but if you're not doing that, I don't think, and you're playing for the util itself, I don't think it's a good support build. But it's very good if you're actually able to consistently get the nades off and do a lot of damage with this. Tank builds, Greatsword Warhammer I think by far is the best tank build. It's also the least used tank build on this list for some reason, but I'm a big fan of this. I think other people that I have talked to about this and have seen me run it in wars are all of a sudden a big fan of this. It's very easy to see why it's so good when you actually look at the kit, but basically you're able to, I could maybe actually pull up a clip of it, but there's a fresh start war that happened like a day ago where I was able to get like a 15-man kill, basically. Like, you're just able to exist very, very well on the point, and you will never die. You're constantly putting out like 15% rend to anyone that's hitting you, and then you're applying a lot of slows. So I live here for like about 4 minutes when this point is like nearly 95%, and then I'm applying all these AoEs, and then you see here I pull everyone in, I push everyone off if they get off the point, and then later on I pull everyone into a Warhammer combo, which should happen in a second here, because I am running 8 Refreshing Ward on this account, and on the live account I can get up to 9, but you see like right here, like this combo, pull everyone in, go into Warhammer, this stun. This is why this build is, I think, the best build in the game right now if you are on a point. Like that right there, it might have not looked like a ton, but that resulted in like 5 to 10 people dying or getting off the point, and we instantly start winning the fight because of that. And it's very easy to do that, and it's very easy to live while you're putting up that much output, as long as you go into the right tree and you're not always in the left tree. So yeah, that build is insane for point. I would definitely recommend it. I have plenty of videos on the main channel if you want to like look over like how I'm running it, and I have like some build guides on it. The only thing I've changed recently is I'm testing running Armor Breaker instead of Path of Destiny for the 20% run, because I think that's probably better util if you're on the point itself, since you can't always get Path of Destiny off. But that's why I'm running that. IGBB still very, very strong. Either way you run it, I think it's still strong. Spear Greatsword I think is strong. It's a build that I said a while ago that I didn't think was as strong with current patch because it didn't like live as well, but with the next patch running in, I expect it to be stronger because Rens will be more important, and Spear puts people on Ren cap, Greatsword puts people on Ren cap. It has a lot of survivability. I could see this build being very good if you build it right. And then other builds that I like VGBB, I think is still strong, but I don't think it's as strong next patch because everyone will be near disease cap. So the main util of this is locking people in place, and if I want to lock people in place, then Greatsword Warhammer is just better at that role. So I think this build is outclassed. I think basically all these builds below AT are outclassed by Greatsword Warhammer. I don't think you could run like all Greatsword Warhammers on point, but I think you could definitely run a mix of that and Ice Gauntlet Blunderbuss. Like I would do, like, if you're 3 people on point, I'd either do 1 to 2 Greatsword Warhammer and 1 to 2 Ice Gauntlet Blunderbuss. I think Greatsword Warhammer actually has better survivability than Ice Gauntlet Blunderbuss, which is the main reason why you would run that build. The only annoying part about running this build is, well, you'll see when I get to healers, and you see like on here already where I have Greatsword on as the best weapon for healers, but the craft mods for the most OP perk on the greatsword, which is the one that cleanses all slows on you and all roots. These craft mods cost about 8k each on multiple servers that I'm on right now. Like on both coasts, so it is the best perk in the game, I think. Just because of the survivability standpoint, like it is just a cleanse pot on a shorter cooldown, basically, for most circumstances. And it's very consistent. You can go through your own team members with it. You could reposition with it. It's just like such a good perk to have. But that perk itself just costs so much that it's very hard to get a lot of these builds suited up to the max. Like the optimized way I'm running this right now is with 9 refreshing ward on point, so I constantly have all these abilities up on cooldown, so it's very easy to get a lot of value with it. But there's other builds on here that I think aren't bad, but I don't think they're as good as some of these other builds. If you're running SNS still, which I have seen people run SNS still, especially on Fresh Start, I'm sorry to tell you, but Greatsword is just a better version of SNS, because DLC weapons are just better than the normal weapons, and that's why you have to pay for them with the DLC, lol. But no, SNS doesn't have nearly as good util as Greatsword, and Greatsword lives better than SNS if you use your abilities well, so I would recommend switching if you're on that build, but if you're running it with a greatsword and you're playing for the weird tech where you swap off the weapon and swap back on the weapon to apply like Rend and Disease off cooldown, then I mean that's just a better version of Void Blade. But that's a pretty good build. I don't think it's as good as running it with a Warhammer, because the Warhammer is like a 15% AoE rend that's versus like a single target rend that you will have off cooldown if you run a lot of refreshing wards, so I'd recommend that over it, but it's still not a bad build. And then these other builds, if you're running them, you should probably switch. Healers, don't think I've done a healer tier list before because I wasn't confident with it before, but I'm fairly confident now that Greatsword is just the best thing to run, and it's the main reason why these craft mods cost 8k now instead of about 100 each, which is annoying to me because I'm trying to roll more of these. So that's not happening anytime soon. But yeah, Greatsword's very, very good because it has the get out of jail free card, and it also has like a passive 15% fortify. You can mess people's combos up, like you can go into Calamity Counter and then you can just mess people up that way. Like it's better at escaping, like also when you use this ability. So this cleanses all slows, right? And then it applies also like a 20% haste to you, which is why people could close the gap with you in the first place on healer now, and why healers die so much. So yeah, it's just so good for healers as well, because people hit you with that slow, you instantly get out of that slow, you do a triple dodged into like putting a sacred on yourself, like you're just chilling at that point. But you do have to like roll the greatsword if you're a healer, because there aren't ones that come with focus naturally. Unlike tanks, which there are a couple that are just farmable, which I've put up on guides in the past, which are very, very good. So I think that's the best weapon. Rapier isn't bad, hatchet isn't bad. I've seen a lot of hatchets recently, I've seen a lot of greatswords recently. Rapier is less common. Don't think Rapier is awful, but like it's a shell of itself, man. Like that weapon is just not nearly as good. Like if you combo everything perfectly so all the perks trigger because you're like dodging attacks, then like yeah, I can get some value, but if you're fighting anything more than a 1v1, like if you have a rapier, you're just dead. Like hatchet, at least you'll live longer because you have the undying passive for like 3 or 4 seconds. But yeah, I don't think rapier is that good, but a little bit better than hatchet if you could combo the abilities correctly, but greatsword just outclasses both of them by a wide margin. Void Gauntlet is not bad next patch. I think it's pretty good, but it's not like insane. In my opinion, I think you should put more emphasis on survivability next patch, and then just use your ultimates to carry fights. So that's why I don't think Void Gauntlet is this good. I think Void Gauntlet will charge ultimate fast, and if you can live with Void Gauntlet, this is like easily S tier. But if you can't live with Void Gauntlet on the life staff, then it's better just to run something with better survivability and figure out a way to get your ultimate fast off your life stat itself, in my opinion. I put Spear on here because I've seen some people run it in OPRs, and it's actually like kind of annoying, but it's not good. Like Great Sword CCs people better, but Spear on a healer, like when you're running at them and they just put you on the ground and then run away. Like, it's funny as hell, and it's also, like, okay in a 1v1 or 2v2, because you have, like, grit on the sweep, so, but I wouldn't recommend it. But it's not awful, but it's pretty bad. And ults talked about this a bit. If you're on attack, Stoneform is really good. I think the Bile stuff on attack will be really good, because you can put these on before you actually rush in. So you can put on, because everyone's going to stand at the gates, right, waiting for you to walk in. So everyone's going to have like a 20% lifesteal on them. Everyone's going to have this disease on them. So it's like, that will be very, very strong. They won't be able to move away because it's crippling and it's exhausting. So yeah, that will be a way to get in the chokes a lot easier than it has been before. So I expect those to be very good. I still think Stoneform is best for most builds, just because it will actually let you live, and living in fort is the most important thing. It doesn't really matter if you trade, because defenders have spawn advantage, so it's more about living. Rending Vines and Detonate aren't bad in fort, but I don't think they're as good as the others builds. Cannon I don't think is awful, because it's buffed, but I think these other builds are just better than Cannon on attack. On defense, it changes a bit. I think Detonate is still strong, because you could hit people in those chokes. You just don't want to get caught early by one of these Bile ultimates. And then Rending Vines is strong on defense, because you could freeze people in that choke. And then the one that applies disease is very strong. Cannon is pretty good, because you can single target people that are like out of position and just blow them up. Like, you blow up healers with this very well that are inside the fort. So I don't think it's as bad as on attack, where your main struggle on attack is actually getting into the fort itself, and that's where people get stopped. It's not the, like, if you could get in a fort and then like get positioned well, like, you can cap it, but it's like the actual getting in a fort is the thing that everyone has struggled with this current patch, and I don't think Cannon helps that problem. But on defense, Cannon definitely makes it harder for people to get in the fort. I don't think the heal Bile is as good on defense, because you're already going to be full HP and people have to run into you, so it's more about getting the kills than it is about not dying. Which is why Stoneform's also rated lower, and Ascent is a meme. But it's fun to see on Fresh Start. So yeah, that's how I would rate all of this. Here are like the patch notes. I can put these in the description of like current ones. They've buffed the Void Gauntlet, because they changed it to actually work in French now. Lol. So yeah, no, Void Gauntlet still sucks, and Void Blade still sucks. Fire Staff, they did the most passive buffs I've ever seen. Like, they really could be a lot more aggressive with this, of how often they do balance patches, but I guess at least they give the Fire Staff something. And then they nerfed Greatsword somewhat with the cross cut, so it doesn't do as much damage with the big slam ability. But, and then Ice Gauntlet Bug is there, and I think that was basically all the notable changes. All the rest are just bug things. The faction change that we've all been waiting for is coming, so there will not be as many super companies, or super companies will only be able to hold like a maximum of 2 territories, I believe, next patch if they have 100-man rosters. I guess they could do more in shells if they're able to have 150, but that's fairly unlikely, and it will have to be different people in those wars, so yeah, we'll see how that pans out. I imagine territories will flip a little bit easier, but that still requires people to actually push the territories, which is just so boring and actual hell. So we'll see more territories flip at least, but that's like the big change there. But this is the tier list I put together. Let me know if you disagree with any of these, or like if there are other builds I forgot to put on here. I tried to go a little bit extreme with the other builds, but if your build's like that you're running's not in like the A to above tier, I don't think it's like generally worth running. Unless you're a support, in which case you just know that you're running not an optimal build next patch, but that's all you can run, because there's no other really support-oriented builds, which is why I don't think you run as many supports next patch in my opinion. But yeah, that's where I stand with all this, so I'll see you guys later and have fun with the new patch.